Hello, welcome. My name is Lenka Buštíková, and I'm the director at the University of Florida Center for European Studies. The University of Florida Center for European Studies is a U.S. Department of Education Title VI National Resource Center for Europe. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's discussion will be recorded, and later it will be available on our website. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation. Participants can submit questions through the Q&A button on the bottom of your screens. Thank you very much for joining us today for the Center for European Studies talk, Is the Future Digital? Geoeconomics of the Digital Europe. The talk is part of the CES series, Innovative Europe, that explores innovations in technology, economics, and humanities in Europe. To learn more about the series and other Center for European Studies events, please visit our webpage, ces.ufl.edu. Now, the most important part. Our speaker today is Dr. Carola Westermeier, a fellow at the Institute of Sociology, Technical University Darmstadt, and a lecturer and senior researcher at Justus Liebig University Gießen. Before joining the University of Gießen, she was a visiting professor of international relations and international political economy at Goethe University Frankfurt and a postdoctoral researcher at the Follow project. She's currently leading research projects on money as data and co-leading a project on financial infrastructures and geoeconomic security. Her broad research interest is based at the intersections of economic sociology, international political economy, and critical security studies. Thank you very much for joining us, and I will hand the discussion over to Dr. Westermeier, and thank you for being with us.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, it's an honor to be here, and I look forward to presenting a bit of research on the digital euro and especially the geoeconomics of the digital euro. So just briefly, I will talk about, well, there's four different topics. So obviously, I will give a short introduction about what is the digital euro actually and also about CBDCs in general. And then I will talk about what I call infrastructural geopolitics and what it has to do with the digital euro. Then a bit more into the concrete plans of digital euro. And then finally also about a topic that always comes up when we talk about CBDCs, and that is also surveillance. So I'm going to dive right into it because I want to, get the presentation started, but also to reserve time for the Q&A because I really look forward to your questions and to the discussion. So on the digital euro, so about a year ago, so October 2023, the euro system and the European Central Bank, so that is the central bank that is at the heart of the euro system, so all countries that have the euro as their currency, announced that they would move to a preparation phase of the digital euro. And along with all of it, they would start a PR campaign as well. So you would find online videos on YouTube about what the digital euro. You will find a nice design and some short explanations about the digital euro. And so that is part of a bigger campaign of what is actually going on. But still, and I will hint to that, we are still quite far away from actually using the digital euro. So what I'm describing in the following is something that will happen in the next 4 to 5 years, more or less, although concrete plans and concrete actions are already taken. So, but still we are quite far away from a concrete digital euro. Having said that, at the moment, I think it is the most interesting time to study the development of CBDCs in general, because, it's an ongoing topic. And it's now the time where some of the major decisions are being made. So having talked about the digital euro and central bank digital currencies already, so CBDCs, going to start first with a sort of very short explanation of what is actually a central bank digital currency. I'm here talking about a retail CBDC, so that is a digital currency that would be available to the public. So in very general terms, in everyday life, we actually handle two forms of money. So on the one hand, we have cash, and that is central bank money. So money that is a form of liability by with the central bank. So this is the safest form of money because the central bank guarantees for its value at the moment. And we have, on the other hand, forms of private money. So that is actually all non-cash forms of money. So the money on your deposit, but also money that you may have when you use PayPal or other forms of private payment suppliers. And also all cryptocurrencies are forms of private money. So the moment we do not have central bank money in a digital form. So what happens when you develop or central banks develop a retail CBDC and central bank digital currency is that you take the characteristics of central bank money, so that safest form of money, a direct liability to central bank, and combine it with the characteristics of digital money, so being, usable in the digital way via smartphones and so on. And for that, you often need a new infrastructure or an infrastructure on which central bank digital currencies can circulate. And that infrastructure also includes standards and rules for digital money to be circulating. So that's in a nutshell what a retail CBDC is. So I'm saying retail CBDC because there are also wholesale CBDCs. That's a different form of money. From the following on, I will talk about CBDCs, meaning retail CBDCs. So having kind of a broad idea of what we're talking about, let's also have a look at what is actually happening internationally in the field or with CBDCs, because we did experience in the past years a sort of global push towards central bank digital currencies. And there are a number of reasons for that. So generally, we have a decline of cash and increase of digital payments. That pandemic also increased the use of digital forms of payments in everyday life, not only when you shop online, but also in stores and so on. But one major push towards central bank digital currencies, and the moment in which most central banks really engaged with the topics, was the announcement of Facebook to issue a digital currency. At that time, it was Libra, then later it was called DM. I mean, the whole thing was kind of regulatorily killed in a way, but it didn't go further in many ways and never really materialized as it was planned. But that was the moment that central banks really engaged with the idea of a digital currency. Why? Because they thought, okay, now it's a serious global player, a tech company that was announcing a private form of money, and they would see, okay, this is a real threat to their mandate to have control and to govern money in their own currencies. And that was the moment when most central banks started or began to be interested in CBDCs. Then two other developments that has been ongoing for some time. So China's developed the digital yuan for quite some time. They really picked up early on the topic. And as you see on that broad map, in the global map, it is in a pilot stage. It's already been used. And we can sort of talk about it maybe more in the Q&A. But for Western central banks, that has also been some sort of threat in the background that, what if China would rule out that currency more internationally, although there are no current signs of them doing that. And then many people think CBDCs are a response to cryptocurrencies. And if you talk to central bankers here in Europe, they would say, no, that's not really the case, because they don't see it as a threat, as a form of payments, because most cryptocurrencies are actually a form of investment, or have become a form of investment. So what is relevant about cryptocurrencies is the underlying technology. So you see several CBDC projects that would experiment also with blockchain technologies, and take the technology that underlies cryptocurrency as a sort of inspiration for their own plans. So if you have a look at this map, you will see that, in several countries around the world, and most central banks around the world are actually somehow concerned with the topic in many different ways. And something that has to be said is that each CBDC project really has particular motives and aims. So there's no overall motivation that unites all of them. Maybe it's a sort of innovation, you could say, at the very least. But still, motivations really differ from country to country. So when I talk now about the digital euro, the motivations that really drive the project are not necessarily the same in other countries. It really differs. Okay, but then let's talk about the motivations for the digital euro. So in Europe, you have a particular situation with payments, and that is also a source of insecurity. As you see on the left-hand side, that it is US giants that actually dominate European payments. So this is Visa and MasterCard, and increasingly PayPal, and obviously Apple Pay and Google Pay that come on top of it. And these are the forms of payments that are dominating more. So on the one hand, in some national states, also for national payments, so within one country, you can sometimes only use one of these international schemes. And then you also have European cross-border payments. So when I travel for, let's say, a holiday to Spain, I would do my hotel booking with one of these credit card companies, most likely. I would shop online with PayPal. So the US companies are really dominating the European landscape. And this has actually become, aware, or the European Commission and Europeans in general have been aware of this for quite some time. So you see here an extract or quote from the Retail Payment Strategy from 2020, where they already mark the whole topic of payments as strategically significant. So it's not anymore relegated to the back office, but payments here as the lifeblood of the European economy. And then in 2023, after the war against in Ukraine, of Russia's war against Ukraine, you also see increasing intensity in how the topic is being framed. So that is, for example, Christine Lagarde, who's the president of the European Central Bank, making this comparison of the dependence of Europeans on Russian gas before the war, and now the dependence on non-European payment providers, saying, when you look at your wallet and you look at your telephone, you see the applications that you use for payments or the cards that you use for payments. And you very soon realize that those means of payments are not necessarily European. So we just have to be careful. Some people will call it sovereign autonomy. I prefer to call it resilience, because that's really what it is. So for me, it's quite striking that here you see the terminology coming from the fields of security, so autonomy and resilience, being used in the sphere of payments and finance. So, and just to say that, this is also still ongoing. So there's a speech today by Piero Cipollone, the head of the directorate of the ECB, who uses these two slides in a speech that he's giving today, and where he makes the case again for the digital euro, and with a warning of geographical fragmentation and the risks of international fragmentation of payments. And what you also see here is, by the way, the European countries that use the euro at the moment, and that some of them do not have a national card scheme, which means that these countries rely on international card schemes card schemes such as Visa and MasterCard, and you do not have an overall scheme which can be used all throughout Europe. So that's it's a real lack that we have there in the field of payment. Well, I talk about the digital euro and that the fact that Europeans perceive their dependency on the US as a threat. You could ask you, why is that even the case? Why are Europeans afraid of being dependent on the United States? I mean, you know, we're close allies for the most time. But there's one experience that I would like to highlight that tells us something about why Europeans may be interested in a particular payment solution. And this is what I will talk about now very briefly. I mean, this is a broader topic, but because it plays into the geoeconomics of the digital euro, I think it needs to be at least mentioned here. So, as you've probably been aware of, that payment infrastructures have emerged as a battlefield for dominance and control, and especially referring to the use of sanctions. Sanctions are being implemented via financial infrastructures such as SWIFT, but also credit card networks, via these private actors that enable sanctioning in the first place. So, and while with regard to Russia, the sanctions regime is, you know, shared between the US and Europe, that hasn't not necessarily been the case for quite some time. If we look, for example, for one example, or for the example of Instex and the case when Europeans actually needed an alternative to SWIFT, that is the global payment network that enables international payments. So that's another financial infrastructure. And actually, SWIFT is based on European soil, so you could say it's a European financial infrastructure, but it is also the core hub for international payments, and via SWIFT the sanctions regime was also enforced. And then in 2018, during the first Trump administration, the US withdrew from the JCPOA, so that is the so-called Iran deal. The Europeans actually wanted to uphold the Iran deal and continue trade with Iran. But it becomes clear at that time that you cannot actually effectively lift the sanctions and continue trade with Iran because they needed SWIFT for that. And the US, after 9/11 and so on, still had the reach on SWIFT and also the reach on the transaction status going via SWIFT. So Europeans needed an alternative to SWIFT to actually continue trade with Iran as they had promised to Iran, you know, as a political promise. So in order to fulfill the European political promise towards Iran, the Europeans actually needed an alternative for SWIFT, you know, again, a financial infrastructure on European soil. So they created this thing here in Instex, and I'm not going into the details of how this works, but this sort of experience that Europeans actually needed an alternative infrastructure to enable or to fulfill their political promises, that was quite an experience. And I think it stuck with some European decision makers for quite some time. Just to say, Instex has not been successful in terms of enabling a lot of trade in terms of quantity, but rather it's been a symbol of Europeans being ready to install an alternative infrastructure that would circumvent the US-dominated infrastructure in the first place. So that's kind of been a symbol for a fragmentation of international payments in general. So having that in mind, that Europeans have that experience that they needed to circumvent and to come up with their own infrastructure to enable their own political promises, we come back to the digital euro and how it kind of seeks to fulfill that promise of enabling European autonomy and European security. So how would the digital euro actually look like, and what is it then in the very end? So we see here the front end possibility. So this is also taking, don't have a note here, but it's also taken from one of the ECB publications. And you see that it looks very similar to other forms of digital cards that you have on your smartphone. So the digital euro would be enabled rather, or most likely connected to a private bank account, and then you have a separate account for the digital euro. You could upload it via the ATM or also via your private bank account and use it for online purchases and so on, all of kinds of payments that you would do with your other sort of payment solutions as well. So on the front end, it wouldn't look much different to most of the payment solutions that we already know. But there's this particular thing at the back end that tells us something about the idea of how the currency seeks to enable European autonomy. So this is the back end. It looks a bit technical, but it's not too much to understand here, that you have this back end here, and this is the core of the digital euro prototype. So this is a prototype here, to say that as a disclaimer as well. It's not the set architecture of the whole thing, but it gives us an idea of how it should work. So this is the back end where the transactions take place, settlements take place. And also there's, by the way, this could something be for the Q&A, the ECB is planning an offline option for the digital euro to be used when you're offline. So that's a particular feature here. But what you see is that this is developed by the euro system. That doesn't mean that the ECB or also the other national central banks, so the ECB and the euro system, is what brings together the national central banks. So that's a bit particular in Europe, right? So you have the national banks like the Bundesbank, Banque de France, who also take part in the euro system. And they're also taking and helping to develop the digital euro. But you don't have that the central bankers would start developing the whole technology and so on. They do so in some ways, but they would also have providers of the technology that would bring some of the components to the digital euro. But these providers, so private companies, they actually need to be European companies. So that's actually a drafted or requirement for providers of the technology, that they are also European and in European hands. So the idea is really to have this sort of backbone of the whole currency in European hands, whereas the front end, and this is what you see here facing in your apps or on device, this could be developed by any sort of payment provider and any sort of bank that connects to the euro system, to the digital euro core here. So also kind of hinting at these two important components here. So this is the centralized ledger. That's also important when we later talk about surveillance and data governance. So where all records about the transactions being made in digital euro are stored. And then you have the application programming interfaces as a device that define the relations between public and private actors. And that's also important when we later talk about forms of data governance in digital euro. Something I also wanted to at least hint to is that it's quite remarkable that we have the European Central Bank engaging thus explicitly with security concerns, or really linking to a broader European agenda of digital sovereignty. And this is not, this is something that especially the president of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, kind of really pushes, but is really also outspoken about, that she says, how central banks navigate the digital era, such as innovating their payment systems and issue digital currencies, will also be critical for which currencies ultimately rise and fall. It is an important reason why the ECB is exploring in depth how a digital euro could best work if launched. And then also really responding to the change in geopolitics, it's, she says it's time to think about how, the time to think how to respond to change in geopolitics is not when fragmentation is upon us, but before. Really bringing central banks, and again, the European Central Bank is an independent public institution, independent of politics, but bringing it really and linking it to changing geopolitics. And I think this is in itself quite remarkable. So I've talked about the security implications of the digital euro. So the idea of providing an infrastructure that would secure European transactions and secure it from non-European interference. So, but when we look at the wider picture, obviously, there's a bit more going on here, and it really also speaks to, payments as a field. So, as I said, we have a new financial infrastructure that links or enables central bank money to be circulated. So it's actually a new form of money that's being developed here. But this is important. There's no disintermediation on the table. So disintermediation meaning that the central bank would establish a direct relationship with users here. Rather, the ECB cooperates with European Bank to ensure their role in the financial system. Also, their role in providing credit to people is being safeguarded. And for that reason, the ECB also is, trying to balance what they're doing with the digital euro with regard to, for example, imposing holding limits, so to make sure that people will have most of their deposits with private banks, because the deposits are being used in the credit for lending out credit. So it's not a direct form of lending out the deposit to for credit purposes, but it's rather a security. So the deposits of people here are used by banks as a security for providing credit. So we see that's also a bit of a public-private balancing act. So on the one hand, you have the ECB seeking to develop the digital euro also as a public good, but on the other hand, they have to win over banks and private payment service providers because they want them also to distribute the digital euro as they are distributing cash to users and citizens. So this is why there are also some, some paradoxes that come with the digital euro, and this has raised criticism by mostly economists who say, that there's no unique selling proposition from the user's perspective, as I've shown before. It looks very much the same to existing payment systems, and also others saying there's no solution. There's actually no problem that the digital euro would provide a solution for. So this is very much the criticism is very much focused on the user perspective, and in the end, the question, how does it make a difference to existing forms of payment? But when you zoom out, as I've done before, and thinking about the broader picture in terms of geoeconomics and also the infrastructural provision, and then I think it is a bit of a different question here. So on the right hand side, you also see that we're actually now in the preparation phase, and there's a lot of development going on at the moment. But next year we will have around this time a decision being made by the Governing Council of the ECB on the potential development and rollout of the digital euro. So that doesn't mean that next year there will be a digital euro for everybody, but there will be pilots and new forms of first tries and that are then being rolled out, and even more concrete testing. So coming to a topic that many raise, because apparently, what I know is that this is something that's linked to CBDCs directly when you go online, and if you look on social media and so on, that CBDCs are often directly linked to the topic of surveillance. So you have that going on online on Twitter at that time. You have it, and I think this is in the UK, some memes and so on. This is actually in Berlin. It says no central bank digital money. It's digital slavery. So this is what it says here. So it's quite the public opinion, or not the public opinion, but there are strong opinions on CBDCs out there, and I think that that's also crucial to discuss here. But before going to specific data governance of digital euro, I would like to first raise awareness about the question how money as a form of data is already used by now. So this is the actual current status about how transactions are already being used for surveillance purposes. So what we have for quite some time is the use of money as data for financial security. So especially after 9/11, 2001, banks and other financial actors are actually obliged to report transactions that are suspicious for terrorism financing and money laundering to authorities. And they're also imposed, as I indicated, to impose, they're also obliged to impose sanctions. So that is already going on for quite some time. And this is all private service providers that are being obliged to do it, and also increasingly providers or exchanges for cryptocurrencies are enforcing these sorts of financial surveillance. So on the other hand, you also obviously have commercial usage of money as data, and we actually do not know too much about it, about how exactly these forms of transaction data are being used. We have some suspicions that payment data are also sold to third parties, and because there are leaks that show, for example, MasterCard as the source of data, and so on. So this is also going on, but what we know for sure is that digital transactions are being traceable. They are traceable. Transactions data are being used at the moment. What is possible is a sort of anonymization if you, for example, separate the transaction from what is identifiable about the person who's doing the transaction. So some cryptocurrencies are doing this and kind of trying to enable anonymous transactions. Yet there seem to be several forms of how these even cryptocurrency transactions can be being linked to a specific person and so on. And it is possible. I think some cryptocurrencies are specially designed to enable anonymous transactions, but since they're increasingly embedded in the established financial sphere, traceability and the enforcement of financial security is also part of their game. So so this is what is already going on. I think this is important to have in mind when we talk about data governance within a CBDC. And I think the digital euro is actually here in this part also super interesting, because it is generally something that it's developed with a lot of information and also discussion that can be followed. Also because the European Parliament and the European legislation in Brussels is also part of the development of the digital euro, because they need a framework, a regulatory framework for the digital euro. But what is seen, what has also been highlighted by the European Central Bank is that privacy is a key feature, and they want to enable it because they know that for Europeans, the privacy of payments is actually something that they really care about. So they try to really promote it also as a privacy-friendly form of payments. But as I said, the regulatory framework is to define the framework of data governance. And on the one hand, we have a sort of data imperative that mostly the private actors are trying to impose here and trying to collect as much data as possible. But we also have within the European Union a demand for collective and individual data sovereignty. And the idea is then to enable privacy as a key feature of the digital euro. So here the ECB says, for example, data availability to the euro system will be limited to what is necessary to perform critical digital euro-related tasks within the regulatory framework, and would also be pseudonymized. So the idea is here, or what the ECB says is, we are not interested in your data. This is not our business model, and we are not. We try to, or what the idea is to divide the transaction data from the data about who's actually enabling the transaction. Yet on the other hand, you have the requirements that are already ongoing for all other kinds of payments. So requirements to tackle terrorism financing, to counter money laundering, and so on. So these things have been weighed, and it's still a matter of discussion about how privacy friendly the digital euro can be. Can it be more privacy friendly than other forms of private payments? So that's open to a discussion. And as I mentioned, the ECB is also planning for an offline feature of the digital euro that could actually enable more or less anonymous payments, because you have then money that could be moved like a token and not related or being linked to your specific identity. So these are the ideas about enabling privacy within the digital euro. Yet, people like why is then the idea that surveillance or mass surveillance can be enabled via CBDC? And this is something I would like to obviously mention, is what you have then with a CBDC, and what I showed before on the slide, is that you have a centralized ledger in which potentially all transactions being made in digital euro. So again, you could also choose a private form of payments, and that would not be registered within that ledger. But if you have the centralized database, the centralized ledger, in which all transactions within the digital that are being made in the digital currency are being recorded, then you obviously have the potential of mass surveillance. So this is there, and this is why regulation needs to be enforced, and that there need to be clear rules in place. But for me, it's interesting to see that this is actually a discussion as it's taking place, and something that we need to follow. Coming to a brief conclusion, I introduced the digital euro as a finance, but also a security infrastructure in which European security ambitions manifest in a financial technology. But it's always also a process. It's a process of materialization of insecurity. So we have that European insecurity about their payments, and it's a process that is shaped by European security rationales, and which is also then in turn shapes financial technologies. So for me, it's also interesting that the infrastructure geopolitics have reached central banks, especially Western central banks here, that are actually, try to stay out of any political discussions so far. They want to stay as apolitical and want to be seen as apolitical as possible. But here we see them emerging as some form of geopolitical actors. And in the digital euro, we also see that data governance is a key feature, and is something that we need to really discuss when it comes to CBDCs. and also discuss options of how privacy can be enabled and can be preserved with regard to a CBDC. Okay, I will leave it there and take a bit more and sip a bit more water, and then hope for some and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was letting you have a sip of water.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, so thank you, everybody. And yes, I was joined by Linka. I posted in the chat, but please feel free to go ahead and submit questions. We already have a few, but please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A, which hopefully should be at the bottom of your screen or somewhere in your Zoom webinar interface. So with that, I will go ahead and just read the first question for you, Dr. Westermeier. So the first question asks, so what would be the reason for the digital euro if it is not to solve an economic problem? Is it that it makes it sanctioning and exclusion from financial systems easier, and how does it make Europe less dependent on US financial infrastructures? And if so, how?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you for that question. It's what you say, it's the last bit that you say here. It makes Europe less dependent on US financial infrastructure. And because it actually provides a new infrastructure for European payments. So at the moment, there's a huge reliance on US providers, as I indicated with some of the slides. And this is a really core motivation for the digital euro, that to enable mostly cross-border transactions, but in some countries in Europe, even within one country, digital transactions, you need non-European payment providers. And there is no overarching European payment solution that tackles this problem. So there used to be a private initiative, the so-called European Payment Initiative, that wanted to tackle that and wanted to provide a private alternative to the US networks, but it didn't really materialize for all sorts of reasons. And so the digital euro is really the only initiative in that case, and really the only European initiative that tackles that question, and really to provide a solution that is not dependent on on US financial infrastructures.
Yeah. As a follow-up, kind of using somewhat the co-moderator function that Linka and I are having here, but so do you see a trade-off? So by moving to the euro and trying to create more of a regional versus a global payment system, is there something that Europe in particular may lose by trying to go there, whether it's that it's just not the efficiency that you had those quotes about, but is there a trade-off to doing this?
Well, I think I'm not sure if it's a trade-off, but rather sort of really extra investment. So many really, so the banks and private service providers, they see it as an extra investment because, they need to install it, they need to connect to it, they need to arrange and engage with it and invest really in it. So for many, from an economic perspective, they're saying like, why is this necessary, right? Because we already have several solutions to pay for, but it's really striking that you do have the euro as a common currency, but you don't have a payment method as a common way of using that currency in a digital way. So some say that the digital euros could also be seen as just fulfilling that idea of common currency in a digital way, because obviously you can pay by cash, but in some form that's not possible anymore. And if I want to buy something in the Netherlands, for example, again, I would have to maybe use or shop online and buy from a store in the Netherlands. If they don't provide Visa, MasterCard, I cannot buy it online. I have no means of paying for it. And that's sort of crazy. I mean, that you have a common currency, but really cannot do all sorts of payments that you want to do. So you could see it in both ways. So the the critics say it's just an additional form, and it's a hassle, it's annoying, and it's not really necessary. Whereas I think from a political perspective, you could also argue, well, it's fulfilling that promise of the euro as a common currency in a digital form.
Okay, so we have another question that is getting at kind of where you see kind of the theoretical developments of this. So especially for those of you that didn't see in the presentation, there is a article that Dr. Westermeier recently published around this. So kind of what the theoretical underpinnings of the argument is. Is this part of kind of that weaponized interdependence of Newman Farrell's and trying to figure out ways to kind of create, to cut that panopticon, or is it more of the Bradford-Brussels effect? And then the question said to thank you for your presentation that they very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Obviously, Farrell and Newman, weaponized interdependence sort of kind of also initiated that sort of a discussion that we have there, and they've provided some really relevant insights here. So what we try to also do in that infrastructural geopolitics paper is to provide perspective on it that really carves out how we have political ambitions built into infrastructure. So for example, SWIFT has never been really a global infrastructure. It has never been a neutral infrastructure, and then at some point it has been weaponized. But it's said, it's set in a specific way. It's being built in a specific way that has always prioritized Western and US banks and financial actors. So with that in mind also, you can then look at something like the digital euro and ask, okay, what are the political ambitions, the political rationalities that are now materializing in that new infrastructure? So because you always have, so the idea or the theoretical idea behind this is that we always have ideas about the future and threats and developments going on that then materialize in what is being built at the moment. So, and to kind of deconstruct it and to have an idea about which sort of ideas materialize and what, maybe also carved out, it's also an interesting question, right? Is something that I would like to bring to the fore here and really think also about the materiality here. This is why I'm also showing the back end to really say what makes this a project of European sovereignty. Where is the sovereign aspect here? And where is it also something that is open to other actors? So, and the Brussels effect, I mean, this is something that could be interesting because obviously I think the community of central bankers is something that watches what other central banks are doing. So, and the fact that the European Central Bank is developing the digital euro as it does, it's publishing lots of documents on it, which is super handy for me as a researcher because I can really follow the progress. But also for other central bankers, looking at what they're doing, how they develop, and also which kind of criticisms they're facing, problems they're facing. There could be something that others then learn from. That definitely maybe want to develop themselves. But as I said in the beginning, CBDCs are really very much depend on the specific content and context. So we have in our project also a PhD who is doing, we have two PhDs, and one has done some research on the digital ruble, so the Russian CBDC, and the other on the digital yuan. And you would think, both US adversaries could be very similar. But if we look at the domestic discourses, then we also see that they're very different, those two projects, right? And how they're promoted and how they're advanced and how, central banks talk about them and not talk about them is also interesting. As for example, the Chinese central bank does not talk about any international implications of the digital yuan. They just simply do not talk about it. Whereas the Russian central bank is quite explicit about the digital ruble being developed in reaction to the sanctions, in reaction to dollar hegemony. So we really have to look at each of these cases to understand why CBDCs are being developed. So I'm not sure if this we can expect a sort of Brussels effect that, you know, other countries or other regions will look to it and say, oh, this is, you know, we'll just take it on. But they will not imitate it. But I think as a form of how it's being developed, it's something that is seen by other central banks. Let's put it like that.
Great, thank you. So kind of a question, you mentioned it earlier in the presentation, then again about this idea of public discourse. And so as we talked about that, this might not be economic driven solely, but very political driven. So is the EU solving a problem that is a very top-down problem that the EU institutions see as an issue, whether it's this idea of weaponized interdependence, or is there citizen? Like, is this more of a bottom up? Has there been, as you said, if you can't use Visa or MasterCard in a certain country, so you cannot have that free movement of, you know, that is enshrined, or whether it's just convenience. Is this also a bottom up problem, or is this really just a top down?
Yeah, great question. I think it's rather been perceived as a top down thing here that is being developed by the technocrats and you know, the Brussels elites and so on. Or in this case, it's the Frankfurt elites, because the ECB is based in Frankfurt. But so because you actually only see, or the bigger picture is being seen from if you zoom out and have this bigger picture of geopolitics and what the infrastructures are and what is happening there. So this is rather political and a broader societal, so macro social perspective then on how payments in general are being secured and are being provided for a broader audience. Yet, so as a consumer activist, recently really nicely put it on a conference. He was asked if digital euro is actually a consumer topic, and then he said, well, the gas prices and the provision of gas wasn't a consumer topic until it was. So referring to the moment when, after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, gas prices, you know, exploded in Germany. So beforehand, no consumer in Germany would have thought about the dependence on Russian gas, and most of them weren't aware of it. But in the moment where your gas price explodes, so, you know, being comparable to a moment when you cannot do a payment, not necessarily because, let's say, Germany as a country would have been sanctioned, but for what is also could be sanctions is specific sorts of payments to specific groups or political parties and so on. So you only realize that you're unable to do something in the moment, you know, when you're not able to do so. So that's sort of the characteristics of infrastructures, that we only realize that they are there if they if they break down and we are not able to use them. And so this is kind of the also double answer on the question of if this is it's just a top-down topic. So it at the moment it is being definitely developed on that hierarchical level. Yet if they wouldn't, let's put it like this, I think it's their also duty as public actors to think about these kinds of things, right? To provide a secure and infrastructure, so that the other case doesn't really materialize.
Well, we are at time, and so I will turn it over to Linka to close us out, but I will say thank you so much for a great discussion and for a great Q&A session. But Linka, I will hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Westermeier. I learned a lot of new things today. And as you know, this administration might engage in a big pushback for digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. So I think this is more topical than ever. And it was a great pleasure. And thank you very much for being us and participating. And I would like to thank my
Thank you.
colleague for asking tough questions. I didn't understand half of it, so I'm glad Corinne was able to handle it. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you. And I just a quick admin as everyone logs off, you will have a survey. So we would appreciate if you could take just a minute to complete that survey. Since this talk was brought today by our Department of Education Title VI grant. So the survey is very helpful. And thank you for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Westermeier.
Yeah, thank you.